Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen, and today I have a catch up for you, what's going on in my life, the books that I've read in the last 2 months, some exciting announcements. Let's just do it. So, first up, I went to Eras Tour. It was a moment in time. It was wild. It was fun. I went with CJ from the channel CJ Reads, and it was phenomenal. We went to night 2 in Glendale, so we got spoiled for the set list, so we knew it was going to be over 3 hours. And so we ended up leaving like a little bit early, skipped all of the traffic. Like, it was very smart, but it was so fun. One of the best moments of the whole thing, well, we saw Paramore to start as well, which is incredible. So it was like a 2-for-1 for me. I love Paramore, but also across the aisle from us, we had like aisle seats. And then there was this young teenage girl, I think she was like 15 or 16, and she was just sobbing the entire time. And it was sad, it was sweet, it was funny. But like the cult of Taylor Swift, that is undeniable. That is wild. Like having this woman singing and people just sobbing in the audience, like experiencing the cult of that was really interesting. Like I'm a cult member, but like I'm self-aware, you know? But like, am I? I don't know. So yeah, that was fun. It was a blast. Oh, so some exciting podcast announcements. This Tuesday, April 4th, I'm uploading my interview with the one, the only Jonathan Franzen. I recorded it on Tuesday. I'm still decompressing and trying to understand what this means for my existence. If you followed my channel for any length of time, I've talked about him for a while now, about how much I love his work. Yeah, we talked for an hour and I still have to edit the video, but I'm a little bit nervous to listen back to it. It went really well, so I think it'll be fine. So yeah, that's coming Tuesday, and it would mean the world if you watched it or listened to it. It's gonna be audio only, but if you listen to it, leave a comment, like, share it with friends, anyone that you know that likes Franzen, or to share it like in your Instagram stories. I'm trying to like make it, be a thing, hopefully, because it feels like a huge personal thing for me. So yeah, it would mean a lot if you supported that episode once it drops. But aside from that, also this month, so in April, I'm going to be recording a podcast with Brandon Taylor. And if anyone has seen my original first YouTube video ever, my BookTube newbie tag back in June of 2020, I talk about Real Life by Brandon Taylor in that video. And so once I nailed him down, we're going to be doing it in support of his new book coming out in May called The Late Americans. I was thinking back upon like what books I felt were very pivotal for like my, discovering what I like in books and reading. And Real Life, when I read it in February of 2020, truly feels like a very singular read for me in terms of how I started thinking about fiction, because then I followed Brandon on Twitter and he tweets a lot about like criticism and how he thinks about novels, and then he has a Substack. So I feel like I'm saying all this because I really attribute that book to being one of the first books that really made me realize how much I love literary fiction and made me want to read more within literary fiction. So it just feels like this whole thing feels wild to me because Brandon Taylor is someone that I've admired for years now. I've been hoping since I started this podcast I can get him on. And so I think it's going to be a fun one. I don't even know where to start. I have to talk about his fiction, his criticism, his Twitter presence, him just being hilarious and smart and a genius. And it's going to be a fun one, I think. He is very entertaining. So I think it's going to be good. So keep an eye out for that as well. So yeah, podcast is going full force. It's kind of interesting to me how like hard I pivoted into podcasting, and I hope that you all enjoy those because to me they feel, I don't know, I'm absolutely loving doing it. It feels like a very huge thing for me. I know this kind of content gets a lot of less like engagement, less numbers technically because it's more of a niche thing. But the support for the podcast has been so overwhelming and nice, and I feel like I'm doing like the right thing, and I'm still doing BookTube, so I'm just having fun, trying to embrace what I'm liking to do. And so anyways, those are the updates on my life, I think. Yeah, and the channel and everything. So let's just get into the last, I think I read 13 books in February and March in total. So first up, I have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai. I had a blast reading this. It was a very unputdownable, thriller-y literary fiction crossover book that I really enjoyed. It follows a woman who is revisiting her boarding school that she went to as a high schooler, and she's now going back to teach a course. She is a podcaster and a film professor now, and so she's teaching a course about film. And when she's back there, she's thinking about her past and memory and trying to figure out whether the case and the person that was convicted of this murder actually did the crime. So it's very much a whodunit. trying to think about memory in the past and this woman, Bodhi, as she attempts to solve a murder from back in 1995. It's told in really short chapters, which I love when I'm wanting something to like get out of a slump. It was also excellent on audio. It was narrated by Julia Whalen, and I think she does a really good job. And if you're looking for something that's sort of like a palate cleanser or something more plotty, that still is quite literary in how it's thinking about post-conviction relief, Me Too, racism. All these issues are kind of contained into one narrative that I really enjoyed. So there's that one. And then the next two books I read are very much in conversation with it. So I feel like these three books are all sort of like doing similar things, and they were really fun to read in the same month because I feel like they all spoke to me together in a way. So the next book I read was Brutes by Dizz Tate, and I co-hosted Sunny's Book Truck's book club for February, in which we read this book. And I'll be honest, when I first read this, I didn't know what the fuck happened. I was very confused. From a sentence to sentence level, I felt very disoriented reading this. It was a very like original read on that front. But it follows this group of teenagers, and it's told primarily in a collective we voice. And there's been a teenager that goes missing. And you know that these kids have something to do with it, or it seems that way. And then interspersed within the narrative, each of those teenagers gets their own chapter as an adult, and you kind of see, or you get some hints at what might have happened. And it all builds up to this very surrealist, very odd, not everything's answered for you conclusion. And when I was looking on Goodreads, I saw that many people said, I don't know what happened, but this was like kind of a vibe. And I agree with that sentiment. That seems to be all over. But I say all of this because when I went to that book club discussion, there was a member, Sujay, who brought so much intellect and insight to the novel that was so excellent. So if you've read this book or you want to read this book, I highly recommend reading it and then watching that book club discussion, because I came away from it feeling like I loved the book so much more after that discussion. Like it's not a favorite of mine by any means, but I really appreciated it much more after I talked about it with other people. And then the last book in this sort of subset, I guess, around like murder and mystery and true crime and like narrativizing these sorts of stories, I guess, is On the Savage Side by Tiffany McDaniel. And this book I loved. I read her novel Betty in January, as I saw that book was all over BookTube and Bookstagram like a couple years ago, and I really liked it, even more than Betty. This one follows these two twin sisters, and the book is doing a novelization of a true crime or a pattern of crimes that occurred called the Chillicothe Six, of 6 women that were murdered in this time, and it follows 2 twin sisters who are implicated in this crime. They're also addicts, and they engage in sex work, and we follow them in their fraught relationship with their family and how they are suffering abuses at the hands of various men. And what I really liked about this book was that it's at once a mystery and it's also a really propulsive tale about 2 sisters trying to discover themselves and escape addiction and the forces that sort of prevent them from doing so. Also, this book is doing interesting things structurally in terms of using illustrations on the page. So, for example, there is a character or a villain in the story who goes by the name, I think, Spider-Man. He is horrific and very scary to read. And whenever his presence is about to come in the story, there are various spiders that are depicted within the text. And so you know, like if you turn the page and you see on the right-hand page a spider, you know he's coming. And sometimes it doesn't seem apparent how he's going to come, but then he does. So yeah, she also has like the river where the bodies are placed after they've been murdered. The river also is a character in itself. There are autopsy reports of the women, and those sections are told in like poetic, lyrical sentences. So basically what the story is doing is giving a voice to these murdered women and using the novel as a form to really explore the stories of these women through a fictional lens. She has a very like lyrical and poetic sensibility to her writing, and yeah, it was really good. And again, like all 3 of these books have something to do with murder and true crime and narratives and how we understand those stories, and I thought that was all really fascinating. Then I read the guest lecture by Martin Riker for my book club with CJ from CJ Reads, and this is a very interesting book that follows a woman who is giving an economics lecture the next day. And so the novel is set when she's in bed, she cannot sleep, and she's thinking about how she's going to give her presentation about John Maynard Keynes. I forget how to pronounce his name. Someone during the book club discussion told me how to say it. But basically she is thinking in her brain, being riddled with insomnia, thinking about how she's going to present this. And what this ends up being is her at once thinking about economics and philosophy, but then she's also in her sort of like half asleep dream state. She's thinking about her own life and her memories and how these very macro ideas are tied to the micro present of her reflecting on her past. The book is really funny. It's really engaging. It's told in this like stream of consciousness style that makes so much sense while you're reading it. It doesn't feel like, I don't know, it feels very structured, but also feels very loose at the same time. And when she's trying to think about how she's going to rehearse the speech in her brain, she goes through different rooms in her house, which is like the loci method of studying or rehearsing something, which I did back in the day when I was in speech and debate to memorize lines. So she's going through different rooms in her house, and it's the way that she's trying to think through different aspects of her speech. And it was just a really interesting, formally inventive novel that I really, really liked. It's really like a depressed woman moving sort of narrative, all about one woman in her mind. So if you want a thinky woman thinking about philosophy, economics, and what it means to be human, all of these questions are explored here, and I really, really liked it. Next, I read Brother and Sister Enter the Forest by Richard Mirabella. I didn't really know what to expect with this book going into it, but I loved it. This book is also structurally interesting in that it jumps around in time following this brother and sister as they grow up in their fraught dynamic with their mother, and how the brother and sister, they kind of grow up relying on each other significantly. And the brother, he is an addict, and we kind of follow him as he gets involved with the very abusive man when he's younger, and how the fallout that ensues from there plays with his addiction and his relationship with his sister and his mother. And so this is basically a very dynamic and interesting story about a family at the end of the day. But Richard Mirabella is also using some like horror elements, some surrealist elements, and using this sort of deconstructed plot to kind of jump around in time to tell the story of this family in a really interesting way. The book is written with so much heart, and it's so original in how it uses very like concise and simple sentences, yet how simplistic it is kind of hides how much depth that's being written about in these dynamics, and I really loved it. So if you're looking for something queer, dark, a family saga, this is one that I would definitely recommend. Okay, next I read Aughnine Fog by Kathryn Scanlan. Kathryn Scanlan is such an interesting writer to me. A lot of her work, she uses a primary source or like a real person or a real diary in this instance, and she uses it to write a fictional account of that primary source, right? So this book, she came into possession of this diary from an estate sale, and she read through the diary and she ends up writing this novel based on it. So it's a very quick read. You can read it in like 30 minutes. But I was so shocked at how moved I was by this diarist's voice. It's written in these very like fragmented reflections, and so not a lot of detail is given to you. But the way that Kathryn Scanlan mirrors this voice on the page was so, I don't know, like when I was reading it, I didn't know what to make of it. And in the last like 3 pages, it all kind of congealed for me. And it's a narrative that I feel like I'll always like remember the very quick reading experience of reading it. I don't know, it's hard to explain this book, but I really was kind of shocked at how much I was moved by so little in this book. And that one, if you want a very, very quick read, that is definitely one I would pick up. Okay, now going to March, I read 7 books. And here I read Island City by Laura Adamczyk. I meant to look up how to pronounce her last name. I think I just butchered it, but this book I loved. It is a really sad book, but I loved what it's doing in terms of structure and how formally it's presented. So it's basically this woman who's revisiting her hometown, and she's in this bar with these various strangers, and it's told in the second person. So basically she is recounting her life story to various strangers in a bar, and she's drinking. And so as the novel goes along, she gets more and more intoxicated. So things get a little bit more loose. And so it's more of this like stream of consciousness style. And we learn about her and her sister and her family dynamics and the various traumas that have been inflicted on that front, and her thinking back on memory and how to fill in the gaps of memory, how to accurately tell a new audience about your memories of the past, and how that forms the sort of outline of a person that you are today telling that. So this one kind of has like a Cusk feel going on to it, which I really like. But by the end of it, this book is like gut-wrenching. It's very sad, but I really, really liked it, and it was really fun to read. And I feel like it's best read at a bar with a beer in hand if you drink. That's how I read this book, and I think it was a perfect way of doing that. So there's that one. Next, I read Dyscalculia by Camonghne Felix. This is a memoir following Camonghne Felix's reckoning with her past traumas, including a very massive, tumultuous breakup in her life and how she dealt with it, and her experiences with bipolar disorder and with self-harm. So this book is incredibly harrowing at times, but what I think is so interesting about this book is how It is, again, I guess all these books are doing something interesting formally. That's something that I'm always talking about on this channel, so I should just embrace it. But it's true. This book, she's a poet, and it uses a lot of fragments to tell the story. She's also considering her Dyscalculia, which impacts your ability to learn math, and how she thinks about Pythagoreans and how she relates it to this breakup. And so she's using a lot of like these big philosophical ideas to explore a very seemingly minute thing that happened to her. But what I think I've seen her talk about in interviews that is really interesting is how she wants to reflect a sort of what some might consider to be like a dry topic or a very simple topic of a breakup and how that can really impact someone. But since she's a Black woman and a Black poet writing about this, how Black writers are often held to a certain standard to write about huge things in their writing, or they're just held to a different level. This book is really embracing her breakup and her past and just thinking about those things on the page very directly and kind of loosely assembling a narrative around this. So yeah, another quick read, really good memoir. I really liked it. Then I read The Woman Who Killed the Fish by Clarice Lispector. This is a part of the storybook series from New Directions in which they are publishing these very short, like in the style of a child's storybook, books. And this one is 4 short stories that are meant for children. And I'm going to be honest here, and I would love your all feedback about this and Clarice Lispector generally. I kind of feel like I've attempted, so I read The Hour of the Star, I read this one, and I started The Apprenticeship, and I only got a little bit into it. But no one breaks my brain quite like Clarice Lispector. I find her books to be so hard to understand and engage with, but I'm still fascinated by them and riveted by them. But I find a really hard time like grappling with them and actually like chewing on them and understanding what she's getting at in her fiction. But she's a challenge that I want to conquer. But then I'm like, am I just trying to like this writer because I think I should like her and I like what I know about her, and you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but this book I didn't really love that much. I read it in 1 or 2 quick sittings and it sort of left my brain instantly. Yeah, I didn't really know what to make of it too much. And it kind of just goes with my running theme with her, which is interesting, but I want to like her. So feel free to read me in the comments if I'm trash and I should like Clarice Lispector, but I'm wondering if anyone else has that similar experience with her work. Okay, next up, oh my God, how am I even going to talk about this book? I read The Shards by Bret, Easton, Ellis, and I truly think that this might be my sentimental favorite book of all time. I don't know when this video is going to be posted, but my book club for Reading the Room, which is part of my Patreon, we were talking about this book on April 2nd, so I don't know if this will be uploaded the day before, but if you would like to join our discussion on Zoom, please join the Patreon. I would love to have you and meet you there. But if you do not want to, or otherwise want to read the book at a later date, the book club discussion will be uploaded to my channel for all to view. But if you want to support the podcast, join the Patreon, you know what I mean? Anyways, The Shards. Why did I love this book, you ask? I love this book because it has everything I could ever want in a book. Like, literally has everything I could ever want. It is queer. It has autofictional elements. There's a slasher serial killer thing going on. How I was describing this book is it's like 1980s autofiction, queerness meets Euphoria meets Scream, which is my favorite horror series ever. Put it all in a blender, and that is the book that is given to you. And that's like, oh, I could die. I also saw Scream 6 this month, and so perfect timing. I love Scream. I love meta narratives. I love autofiction. I love slashers. I love darkness. I love queer longing. Like, this book has all of it. It basically follows Bret Easton Ellis in the present, like writing into his fictional being, reflecting on his time, senior year of high school, in which a new guy comes to town and there's a bunch of serial killings going on. There's a cult that is stalking LA, and Bret, he is thinking about, in the timeline of his youth, he's thinking that this new boy to town named Robert Mallory, he thinks that he is the killer, but he also like wants to sleep with him, you know? So there's a lot going on. But yeah, then people close to Bret start getting killed, and it's just like, it's so juicy. It's basically like a thriller, but it's doing such interesting things with how the narrative is presented, and that it's Bret, the fictional Bret, telling the story to us, and him thinking about memory and reflecting on his youth and the loss of innocence through this like psychosexual thriller narrative that you don't know what is true or what's not. Like, did this actually happen to Bret when he was younger? Doesn't really matter because the story itself is so fun, but then it plays with the present writer, Bret, who then meets... I'm getting too ahead of myself. Anyways, I loved this. It was so much fun. It was like 600 pages of just like joy. Like, I was like giddy reading this book. Like, so giddy. I'm getting like teary-eyed talking about it right now because I was like, this is what I want to find in books. You know what I mean? I'm excited and also sad that it's over because it was just like ecstasy reading this book. So I cannot wait to talk about this. I'm like rambling about it because I can't even put a coherent review together. But during the book club discussion, which I'm preparing for this weekend, we will be talking about it. And I have many thoughts. And it's so fun. So please go read it if that sounds interesting to you at all. 3 more books. I read The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante. Slapped. I was looking for something quick. I was in the middle of preparing for the Jonathan Franzen interview, and I was getting like massive amounts of anxiety, and I like felt like I couldn't read anymore because I was just like thinking about it. I was like, you know what? I need something quick, something that's been on my TBR for a while that has some stuff about it online so I can like feel like I have a connection with others that have read it instead of something brand new that no one's really read. So I picked this book. Loved it. So interesting. The story itself was so surprisingly dark and like propulsive that I didn't really know what to expect with this because I've read The Lying Life of Adults, which I didn't love per se, and then I also read her nonfiction book In the Margins, which I liked, but it wasn't her fiction, and so it's all I've known about Ferrante, but I know she's like queen of lit fic like online book communities, and so this one I really liked in how we follow a woman who has 2 daughters, and this book is really thinking about motherhood and the constraints of motherhood and not really wanting to be a mother and like the compulsory nature of what being a mother requires. And this woman thinking about all of these things when she's on vacation and watching another family on the beach, and then the actions that she takes regarding that family and kind of getting involved in their messiness. This was just like juicy drama, kind of weird, and just really fun. And I really liked how it explored motherhood. It kind of reminded me of Motherhood by Sheila Heti, but like actually using narrative, you know? Very good compliments to each other, I would say. Okay, next I read Eastbound by Maylis de Kerangal. This book slapped as well. So Maylis de Kerangal, I read her book Painting Time back in 2021. It was recommended to me by Lauren Euler, author of Fake Accounts, and she just published a piece in the New Yorker about Eastbound, which just came out, and about Maylis de Kerangal and how she's underrated and how she's so good, and I totally agree. I feel like Maylis de Kerangal needs to have like a booktube, bookstagram renaissance. Like, y'all need to read this author because she is so phenomenal, and I really feel like so many of you would like her work. It's just fantastic. She's a French writer, and this book follows a Russian conscript who is on a train, and he, I believe, is 20 years old, and he's on the train reporting for duty basically, and he has been enlisted and he wants to escape the train. He does not want this fate for himself. He wants to leave. And so the book is a novella. It's very short, but it's all about him trying to escape this train and trying to flee and escape his fate basically. And then he meets a woman on the train who, for various reasons that you learn, feels compelled to help him escape. What I loved about this is that it's such a moving yet suspenseful as hell propulsive read. It makes such a good movie as well, I think. But what I love about this is that she uses suspense and such rich characterization in such a few pages that I was really riveted the entire time, but I was really like sitting there like, please get him off this train. Like, I want him to escape. There's so many like very close calls. It's very cat and mouse kind of a thriller as well. But aside from that, Maylis de Kerangal, to me, she's so singular because her prose is so like long and crafty, and she does weird things with sentences that I really love, but it still makes it easy to read. And I feel like that was very much a part of Painting Time as well. Anyways, Lauren Euler, she wrote a piece about her in the New Yorker. Definitely go read it, but definitely just read this author. This one is a very quick read, so it's a good introduction to her work. And then the last thing that I read, Your Name by Esther Yi. This was one of the weirdest books I've ever read, but also one of the most engaging and surreal and funny and very just, it's so original. And I think a lot of you all that watch my channel will really like this. It basically follows this woman who is a Korean American and she's living in Berlin, and her friend gets her into K-pop basically, or makes her think about K-pop and fandoms, and she ends up becoming obsessed with a K-pop star within this group. and she ends up establishing this sort of like parasocial relationship with him. But it's about that, but it's not really about that. It ends up being this true excavation of this unnamed narrator's identity and her pursuit of trying to meet this K-pop star. But it ends up, by the second half of the book, it kind of just completely unravels. It becomes surrealist and so like philosophical and like weird, and I don't know. So this one, best going into it blind. It's sold in 12 chapters. It's a quite short read, but there's so much meat and juiciness to the very like deceptively simple prose that's being presented here that I loved so much. The book is so funny. I've never read any book like this, truly. Like Esther Yi, to me, so I met her. We recorded a podcast. I'm leading up to saying this, basically. I finished the book. We recorded a podcast, and I have to edit this still, but I truly think it was one of the most revelatory and one of the most fun and engaging and thought-provoking experiences I've ever had with books. Like talking to her for 1 hour. She was so cool, so nice, so interesting, so engaging. She had things to say about like me and my channel, which I was kind of surprised by when she came on. She said she had watched a couple of my videos and she had some feedback that kind of tie into the ideas in the novel. It was so interesting. I was taken aback a little bit. It was so fun. So definitely keep an eye out for that. That's coming April 18th. So I recommend reading the book, then keep an eye out for that podcast because it's really, really good, I think. And I really loved it. And I felt very emotional after it, which is really interesting. In that episode, we talk about like emotion and stuff. And I think I'm more emotional than she is, but and sentimental generally, but it was really fun, like exploring that. Anyways, that is Your Name. Loved it. Very, very good. So yeah, I had an excellent 2 months of reading. And last thing here for the Franzen interview, I did some rereading of passages from Crossroads, and then I also dabbled around in this book called 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel by Jane Smiley. I didn't read all of it. I was kind of just starting it, and then I didn't feel like I could finish it in time for it, but I did like parse through it, and I want to revisit it when I want to like dive deep into a piece of literary criticism, but right now the brain's just not braining on that front. But I really liked it, and I got some questions for the interview from that book in like the first 2 chapters that I read in full. Anyways, just want to touch on those there as well. And then last thing, I'm also currently in the middle of reading 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. I am doing this reading group with the Center for Fiction, which is being led by Samuel Rutter, and I'm loving it. We had our first meeting, so we read part 1. So every meeting, there's 5 meetings in total for each part of the book. And so on this Wednesday, we're meeting for part 2. And so we're reading it through June. So I'm not going to have like my full thoughts on the book until June, but just so you know, that is something that I'm also reading and engaging with. And it's a very weird book, and I can tell it's going to get dark really quick. So yeah, I'm intrigued. But anyways, that's what I'm doing these days, y'all. I hope you're digging the channel. I feel like my face and like talking to you all isn't as happening as much, but I am very much here. I am very much busy, and I'm hoping you're liking this direction for the channel. It feels very generative and fulfilling for me, so I'm hoping that kind of like bleeds over to my viewership as well. I can't fucking believe I'm getting these people on this channel. The social experiment that is Reading the Room is like, it feels like it's coming to an end soon. It's not, but like, I can't believe I'm getting like my favorite authors on, and it's just like, it's just, I don't have words. I don't have words. So anyone who's supporting it, either through listening, watching, sharing, joining the Patreon, like, you're making my little dreams come true. I don't know where this is going. I've said this many times on the channel. I'm just having fun, y'all. So yeah, anyways, I will catch you all in the next one, which will be the Jonathan Franzen interview. Please check it out. I hope you like it. It was a fun one, and lots of fun things to come soon on the channel. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you later. Bye.